Mr. Chowdhury,
Yep.
correct pronunciation of your first name.
It's Shaniyat, but I go by Sean for short.
Sean. Okay.
Okay, it's loading. It'll be just a second. You should be seeing something pop up shortly.
Is this says preview broadcast?
Yeah. You can preview it and then you can select go live.
All right, yep. So I click preview. I could write, what are you seeing now? Yep. So I could go live.
Yep.
Click preview. I could write, what are you seeing now? Yep. So I could go live.
Yep.
Click preview. I could write, what are you seeing now?
Okay,
Yep.
we've got a loop. Who's on the loop?
Yep. Why am I looping? What are you seeing now?
Okay. Let me see. Oh, okay. I think it might have been from Sakinah. Okay, I believe we should be going live here. I'm going to check on our page. And I don't see it yet. Sam, are we up yet? So you might as well chit chat with each other while we see. Okay, we should be on broadcast now. Let's see. All right. Yeah, I think we're up now. So happy 420, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Happy 420. I'm feeling good today. How are you guys feeling?
How's everybody doing? Okay.
Happy 420. I'm feeling good today. How are you guys feeling?
How's everybody doing? Okay. Trying this again. Is everybody up?
Why am I hearing a loop?
I don't hear a loop anymore.
Yeah. It's looping.
Yeah,
Do
it's still
you
looping
still
on my end.
Do you still have it on your computer? Remember, you're on computer first, right? Or no, that was Sean.
No, Sean's just on his phone. Anthony, are you on Buds? Do you have your Buds in?
Yes.
You got feedback coming in from the phone live. Are you still getting a loop? Are you still getting a loop?
Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Are you still getting a loop?
No, not now.
Okay, good. Awesome. Well, we're coming to you live coast to coast, obviously with a little bit of technical difficulties. So my name's Albert Lee. I'm running for Congress here in the 3rd District of Oregon, and we got a great group of folks here. Why don't we go around the horn? Macio, you want to start us off?
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what's up, everybody? It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Anthony Clark, former congressional candidate, current special education high school teacher, community activist and organizer. Just looking forward to this conversation. So happy 420 to everybody. Hope some people are blazing up today.
Ladies, next.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Sakinah. I'm 25 years old, and I am a candidate for Congress in Florida's 24th district, which is also the heart of Black Miami. So I'm super excited for this conversation about criminal justice reform, legalization of marijuana, and really, what do we got to do to make this a criminal justice system instead of the injustice system that we see every day for decades now.
And my name is Shaniyat Chowdhury, go by Sean for short. Run for Congress in New York's 5th congressional district, which is in southern Queens, includes the Rockaways and parts of Nassau County. I'm fighting and running for Congress just because I'm tired of working people being left outside the democratic process. So I'm an activist and organizer, and I'm taking on a 20-year incumbent who is really hard on drug laws, and I'm fighting everything against that because we don't just need criminal justice reform. We need to continue to really revolutionize it.
All right, and I'm Macio Lyons. I'm a San Francisco, California native, coming to you from Treeal Business Podcast. I'll be a moderator today. Our podcast is about cannabis, people of color in the cannabis industry. We also put a heavy emphasis on equity because we know that people of color make up less than 1% of the cannabis industry. So we want this to be an open market for and lower the barriers of entry for everybody who's been excluded from every other major industry in this country.
Yep.
Hope
Awesome.
everybody's having a great 422.
Woohoo. Yeah, so we got serious conversation here, right? We're talking about criminal justice reform. We're also tying in, the state of the reality of cannabis legalization across the country and the impacts that they have on mainly Black and brown folks, right? I mean, so those things are all wrapped together. And I know that Macio is here to sort of just keep us going. If you out there that are listening and watching have questions, feel free to shoot us some questions on our various pages, and we'll get those questions up and answered. But yeah, so where do you want to start us off, Macio?
Well, being that today is 420, I guess I'd like to start off with someone's take on cannabis legalization on a federal level. Let's start with you, Sakinah. What?
Okay, just go. Okay, awesome. So the biggest thing we're talking about equity, and that is the fact that marijuana and cannabis dispensaries are currently open and being considered essential business, while we have hundreds of thousands of Black and brown people sitting in jail for marijuana possession and marijuana distribution. So that's number one. Number two is, if we wait for states to legalize on their own time, especially states like Florida, by the time we legalize state by state, the entire industry is going to be monopolized by not only corporations, but the same white people that locked up all the Black and brown people for marijuana. So it's extremely important, especially coming to represent the state of Florida, a state that is far behind most other states on everything in terms of any type of real equitable progress. Federal level is the only way to go. Waiting on states is taking too long. And it's also the pharmaceutical companies and our politicians can profit.
Okay.
Man, I mean, I think you're right about that. When we talk about decriminalization and of marijuana here, Oregon was one of the first states back in 1996 to do that. But that didn't mean that it was equitable for all folks. I mean, people were still getting charged with possession here in this state. And generally speaking, the darker you were, the more likely you were to get arrested, the more likely you were to be incarcerated for whatever auxiliary issues that may have surrounded that. Same thing when it comes to the legalization. Again, Oregon was one of the first states to legalize cannabis, but again, we had a race of the wealthy coming in and taking over much of the industry. Then you start having a lot of corporations come in to try to take over as well. And I know here in our state, we've done as much as we could to try to stop that from happening, try to maintain a mom and pop kind of a system. But still, when you're talking about the people who are impacted with the stick, it's always the Black and brown. And then the people who are profiting tend to be white and tend to be wealthy.
Right.
Yeah, and do you want to go?
No. I was just wanted to get your take on it. I know Anthony, they just came online, and so he'll have a mouthful to say about that. Let's hear about what's going on in New York with the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think adding on to both Sakinah's and Alfred's points, it is a Black and brown issue. The whole issue around cannabis legalization and, the war on drugs, it has nothing to do with how drugs affects our bodies. It has everything to do with who uses it. When we look at historically in the late 19th century and early 20th century, we had Asian immigrants, we had Black Americans, we had South American immigrants who were partaking in opiates and in cocaine and marijuana, and it was okay at the time when white Americans were using it. But whenever a person of color or Black person started using it, they had to start prohibiting it just because they found it to be dangerous. A lot of white Americans thought that it was dangerous for any person of color to really use drugs because they had no idea how people of color would really react afterwards, while being intoxicated, I guess you could say. And so there's that fear right there in terms of white Americans of how people of color use drugs, and there's this misconception, stereotypes of people of color like us being violent, being intoxicated, lazy when we're on drugs, which is not the case. And when you look at even today, for example, I live in the epicenter of where Stop and Frisk happened in Queens, New York, and I kid you not, every 2 seconds I see a cop car rolling by. But I guarantee you, whenever you go to a nice neighborhood, the patrolling of police is really less relevant over there. So it has everything to do with who uses it and not how it really harms us. So I think we're in a day and age today where we could really continue to fight for this injustice. And there's so many people who that need to be freed up from this prison system just because these drugs at the end of the day are not harmless. And we'll touch upon that more often.
Well, I mean, I think I want to pick up on one of the things you were saying there, Sean, and that's just the percentage of usage. I mean, regardless of what we're talking about, whether legal or illegal substances, percentage of usage is the same across the board. Yet when you talk about the percentage of incarceration, then it's skewed.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with what everyone has shared, and in Illinois, January 1st, we became legalized. I'm a medical cannabis card holder. But for me, this travels back to essentially the establishment of this nation, a capitalistic society. Capitalism and oppression are inherent. I believe that we have to understand that Black and brown bodies, if you go back to chattel slavery, Black bodies, we're still viewed as commodities. So even though many of us possibly recognize that slavery ended on June 19th, 1865, we see that we have slavery by another name. And one way to guarantee that you continue to have commodified bodies within our criminal justice system was the prohibition of cannabis, and to a larger extent, the racist war on drugs. As stated earlier, if you look at federal prisons, 80% representation of drug offenses are Black and brown. If you look at state prisons, we're talking about 60%. And clearly, we don't represent 80 to 60% of the population as Black and brown individuals. So though we're legal here since January 1st, as was stated earlier in Illinois, we're seeing firsthand how Black and brown individuals are being frozen out of the market. So individuals, predominantly white, wealthy individuals that benefited when it was prohibited, are still benefiting when it's legalized, because individuals that want to get into the market that used to be tied into the criminal justice system still are not provided the capital or the opportunity to do so. And as also was stated, you have states next to us bordering like Wisconsin and Indiana that are putting out edicts that if you cross our border, with cannabis, with this plant, you will be prosecuted. You will be placed into the criminal justice system. So without question, we have to legalize at a federal level. And I think it's tied directly into the legacy of slavery, as well as how we look at and talk about reparations and racial justice.
And I wanted to go back to what you mentioned when you mentioned the beginning of like when weed was first made illegal and all of that, and the war on Blacks and browns, because I believe it was President Nixon who had the first committee to classify all drugs. And every single person, the scientists, the doctors, every person that the president had called onto this committee of health professionals and everything to classify the drugs had said that cannabis should be in the least regulated category. But then they turned around and put it in the category 5 with all of those heroin and everything else because of the war on Blacks and browns. And actually, I had to pull up a quote real quick because I learned that in when I was studying poli-sci. It's like one of the most interesting things I learned, because the way they talk about it as if, you would never know that they actually did research and it was literally professional said it should not be made illegal. So that was, I believe, in the 60s. And then in the 70s, they brought on a Schaefer Commission, which they called, it's named after Schaefer, who was the head of it. And he literally said to Congress, and I quote, "The criminal law is too harsh." So this was discussing decriminalizing it in small amounts. But he said, "The criminal law is too harsh a tool to apply to personal possession, even in the effort to discourage use. It implies an overwhelming indictment on behavior, which we believe is not appropriate. actual and potential harm of use of the drug is not great enough to justify intrusion by the criminal law into private behavior, a step which our society takes only with the greatest reluctance. So it has literally been from the beginning of, presidential administrations for decades now used as a tool, when literally all you have to do is Google the fact that every single professional and person that was brought on board to discuss the legalization or criminalization of cannabis said it should be decriminalized since the 60s.
And on top of that, when you can just make an economic argument. So the war on drugs since Nixon administration has spent millions and millions and millions of dollars and incarcerated millions of people. And there has been no result to that. Number one,
Billions, not millions, billions.
You have increased the black market for a variety of different substances. You have not provided aid or assistance to people who are dependent on a variety of drugs. And you basically have just ballooned this amount of money that's gone to the police. Instead of wasting all of that money on the punitive system, on policing, what should be done is decriminalizing, quite frankly, using the Portuguese model and decriminalizing all drugs, right? And then focusing on taking care of drug dependency with individuals through, guess what, a single payer Medicare for all system, right? And stop adding on additional obstacles and harms to that individual and that individual's family that move on in through generations, right?
Definitely.
Right. For what Sean said about starting from the beginning with them criminalizing Black and brown people for using cannabis, I mean, I think there's a parallel now. The bar is so high to get into the cannabis business that they're being marginalized again. You understand what I'm saying? Like, first we criminalize you for using it. Now that it's legal, we set the bar so high, the barriers to entry for you to get into the business the legal way are almost impossible, either because you don't have the money behind you, or you have a criminal record from the same things that you now have decriminalized and say, okay, you can't participate.
And that's why when we talk about legalization, we can't just talk about making it legal. It has to come with what we were talking about with equity, where we provide a pathway for all these people to get into the business, as well as expunging past convictions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, any policy platform that talks about legalizing marijuana at the federal level but leaves that stuff out is not something that we should support. It has to address all levels of decades and decades of oppression, which takes a lot of thought and a lot of work. It's not just some simple, hey, let's make it legal. And I also love like how the states that have legalized it, they tax it really high, but some state, I think Colorado took it and put it towards education, and then another state took it and put it towards their healthcare system. I think the state of Washington. So again, economics are huge, but we can't just talk, it's not about equality. It's not about it being legal. It's about the equity behind it and allowing us to come into the industry as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then one last thing about when they're talking about expunging criminal records for cannabis, one thing that I think a lot of people are not talking about is they always say, okay, low-level drug offenses or minor drug participants or traffickers, whatever label they want to give them. I think that is a contradiction in itself when you have these major corporations. I mean, I'm in the cannabis industry also myself, and I was speaking to a distributor, and this guy tells me, we move 4,000 to 5,000 pounds a month, and it's just like a bell went off in my head. I said, man, 4,000 or 5,000 pounds a month. So you're doing this legally. So the guy who was doing it in the traditional market, the black market, whatever you want to call it, you want to put him in federal prison for 30 years, but now it's okay for you to do it, and you can do 4,000 or 5,000 pounds a month. And I think that as long as there's no violence involved, I think that it should go all the way across the board. Doesn't matter how.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
You make a great point. And I think one issue I have, again, January 1st in Illinois, but across our nation, for me, expungement should be automatic. I think we're still placing the burden on, again, individuals that have been oppressed, individuals that have been denied equity, access, and advocacy. So once we pass these laws, it's still inequitable and unjust to expect these individuals to have money to then find legal counsel, to have the wherewithal and the time to do their own research, to push their own expungement. So I think we need to free them all, and it needs to be automatic expungements across the board, where there's zero responsibility for the individuals that have been caught within the system, because that's still not justice, thinking that they have to pay for their own freedom when they're already free.
Well, that's part of the continuation of the racket, right?
Yep.
So, I just think, we could keep going further on this, and we can walk our way down to prison abolition. And quite frankly, I think that we really need to start talking seriously about what the purpose of prisons are.
Yeah, I mean, the prison in itself, it's a gateway to slavery. We still have, Section A of 13th Amendment, where we still have legalized slavery. So in itself, the prison industrial complex, it is not built to rehabilitate people. You are already putting in place, look at it this way. Every 2 out of 3 people who are released from prison are rearrested within the next 2 to 3 years. And it's the same people over again. It's the same marginalized people, Black and brown people, queer people, LGBTQ people, sex workers, right? It's the same that are being rearrested. So you're taking them out, you're taking them from the civilized world back into a complex where it's, where it's placed in violence. So when we have a cyclical system, so when you place people in an environment where there's already violence, you put them back on the street, people are going to resort to knowing what they know, how to survive. People commit crimes out of survival, not just because they want to. So when we destroy the prison industrial complex, we have to look at how we structure going forward. We do need to rehabilitate people, making sure that people do have things like Medicare for all, make sure that people have access to jobs and education. When you put all these things in place, people will be swayed away from any kind of violence, from any kind of crime. So we really need to readjust the way we look at the criminal justice system. It is not a system that is meant to, it's just a cyclical system. It's not going to rehabilitate people. That's not what we're in right now.
Okay, I want to change the direction here for a second. We had a question come in from a viewer. This is a non-cannabis, non-criminal justice question. It says, despite the last 4 years being a mess of populism and disdain for candidates on both sides, why can't the Green Party gain any traction whatsoever? Anybody care to answer that?
I mean, I think for starters, we don't have ranked choice voting across the board. In a state like New York, for example, in the primaries, you need to be affiliated with one party and be able to vote for, the candidate of your choice. And when we look at Bernie Sanders, for example, in 2016, I was someone who was an independent voter at the time, and I couldn't vote for Bernie Sanders because I was not a Democrat. And a lot of people had switched over to Democratic Party this time around, thinking, we could get that push. And obviously, with everything that's gone on, it's really turned off a lot of voters. It's a big chunk too. Independent voters are a big chunk of the voting population that can make a huge difference come November. So I think that when we looked at ranked choice voting, allowing an open system to really allow everyone to vote, I think that we could definitely see a more democratic process going forward.
I hear you.
I agree, especially coming from Florida, which is a close primary state. I have, as of 2018, 110,000 NPAs in my district, which ends up being almost one NPA for every 2 Democrats. But the reason I would say that the Green Party, it's not necessarily, my answer is not really why they can't gain traction. But for instance, a lot of people ask me, well, why did you even run as a Democrat? Why didn't you run as an independent? And here's the thing. We can disagree with the power structures that are in place, but I could have ran as an independent just to prove a point and had zero chance of getting on the ballot to actually do the work that we're trying to do. So while we might disagree where the power lays, the fact of the matter is right now with the current system that we have, it is within the Republican and the Democratic Party. So while I understand the views of it can't be reformed at all, right now we have 2 choices. We spend the next, how are we even going to get ranked choice voting, right? If we don't make some shifts in Congress, that's not even going to be a consideration. So It's a long-term process where, we can continue to build these other parties. But at the end of the day, right now, people are dying every single day for lack of healthcare, climate change, homelessness, lack of jobs, lack of wages, all of these things. And so what we're looking at is a long-term battle. And so for now, whether we like it or not, we have to go where the power is and bring our voices and our vision to transfer it now. And then we'll see where we go in the future. But that's what we need to do right now because people are dying.
Well, here's the thing. I think that there are a couple of different things that are running through Congress right now that would help to break up this two-party duopoly. One of those is HR 4000, which is the Fair Representation Act. So basically what HR 4000 does is two things. It, number one, incorporates ranked choice voting, which is necessary if you want to have anything besides choosing the lesser of two evils, right? Number two, it starts looking at our individual districts and deciding, hey, maybe we should not have these single member districts. Maybe we should have multiple members in districts. So, you know, say in New York or in Chicago, you have multiple districts within the Chicagoland area, right? Bunch that up and have multiple representatives for one district, and then you do a ranked choice voting. It allows for more people to get true representation. It allows for more parties to bring up different discussions, different ideas. So, you know, like here in my district, we're almost 80% Democrats. Now, that's cool if you're a Democrat, but if you're a Republican or if you're an independent, that's not cool for you. So if we had a situation here where we had multiple representatives and we had multiple people running for it in a ranked choice voting system, perhaps we would have a couple of left-leaning people and maybe one right-leaning person, and then everybody really gets a better and more fair representation. It holds our elected officials more accountable, and it provides more representation for more people. So I think something like an HR 4000 would help to promote a Green Party, would help to promote other third parties, and quite frankly, would help us to break this two-party duopoly of two corporate parties, two sides of the same ruling class.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that question for me, I think we're at a point now in 2020 to where it's valid to question, talk about, and debate, is it possible to reform a broken system? You know, this is a nation that I believe is built upon oppression and genocide. So the foundation is corrupt. You know, so when I hear questions about the Green Party, questions about being independent, I do believe that any individual member of an oppressed class should theoretically be independent, and parties should earn our vote based upon policy, not the weaponization of identity politics, so on and so forth. But it's a valid question, you know, that I'm continuing to battle with in a sense. Can you reform a broken system, or does that system need to be just burned to the ground and lay salt to the ground?
Yeah, I agree with Anthony, because even though that legislation, even though it's introduced in DC, we get to think about who's in power right now. You know, we have a few group of members of Congress who are really progressive or leftists. But when we look at the overall majority, who's in office right now, the majority of the establishment Democrats and Republicans probably don't want ranked voting to happen or have an open primary system because it does not benefit them at the end of the day. So I think that we need to really, you know, it's not a left-right issue, it's not a Democrat-Republican issue, it is a bottom to top issue. So we do have to burn this thing to the ground and really rebuild it on our own.
You know, I hear you loud and clear. I think, quite honestly, we got hundreds of progressives that are running for office. We are four that have thrown our hat in, have stuck ourselves into the arena this cycle. For me, I think that if we can get a good 10, 12 out of the hundreds that have run into the halls of Congress and put together a voting bloc, we can actually affect the changes necessary, because there are solid
Absolutely.
folks within our that Bernie has basically risen from his 2015 start, has you know, really activated. I think that you know, depending on how things pan out this cycle, we can actually do truly have a true real change, because you know, folks like us, we're not part of the establishment. We're not part of the quid pro quo. We're not part of you know, trying to do this for a career. We're trying to affect real change. And I think that if we get there, if we get a good 10 or 12, that's enough for a voting bloc that can really sway some things.
And I love what you said about, like, we're not doing this for a career, because that it's so crazy. So many people are like, you really want to run for that seat? Like, that's political suicide. I'm like, well, unfortunately for you, I don't have, the gift, the privilege of taking 10 years to figure out, oh, what kind of race, because I'm not doing this for a political career. I'm not doing this for any other reason than the fact that people need us right now. Shoot, I don't even have health insurance myself. You know what I'm saying? Like, we need this right now. So for you to say, oh, just wait for Congressman Wilson to retire or whatever, why would I do
What
that?
exactly is that, right?
Wait for him to
It's called
die.
the establishment. It's how they do it. They pick who's going to have power and when. And if you disturb that, that's how we've ended up with the system that we have. And that's why it's so important that people like us get in, because when people are wondering why people don't vote, why people don't trust the government, why people dislike both parties, despite the vast differences between the Republican and Democrat values, it's because we've been led for decades by legislators that literally do not care about us. They care about lining their own pockets. And that is it. And I love what you said, because there's literally a handful of candidates of people like us in Congress right now. And look how much they've done in the past 2 years, not even a year and a half. 2018, we had the youngest person ever elected. I hate that they always talk about how AOC is the youngest woman ever elected. She's the youngest person ever elected to the Congress, not just youngest woman. Then you have the first Muslim woman. You got the first Native American woman. You got the first Black Congresswoman from Boston. Like, this is all the first that just happened. And so I want to tie this to just a positive note real quick, is that when the people that have lost faith in the system, we're just starting to make a little bit of progress. Like, we just got there. We just got our feet in. So like, I understand when people have lost so much hope already, but look what happened when people went out and voted for candidates that they actually believed in, that were actually fighting for them. Just a handful of them in less than a year and a half have completely changed the entire conversational discourse in politics in the United States. So yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the thing. I mean, you look at the screen right now, we're typically younger, we're typically browner. We're the folks that they say that you aren't supposed to vie for representation. Here in my state, we've had 64 representatives from the state of Oregon. We've had one that has been an immigrant, and we've had one that has not been white, and it was the same person. I'm not trying to make this just based on ethnic background, but I'm talking about lived experience as well. I mean, for the majority of our representation, over half of Congress are millionaires. They can't understand the struggle. They don't understand what it means to have to, make ends meet, really to decide a gallon of milk or a gallon of gas. And I think that by having more people who know the struggle in Congress, you're going to help to really, truly affect the change that we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been working since I was 13. I'm running against a congresswoman whose net worth is $1.5 million. So, and listen, y'all, it's $10,500 you have to buy your place on the ballot in Florida. Wow. So when we wonder why District 24 is not only the blackest district, but also the second poorest district in the state, one of the poorest districts in the country, we can't even afford to run.
Wow.
Like, we can't even afford to run. Not only do you have to raise the money, like, you don't just raise it and say, hey, Florida, look, my campaign's viable. You have to raise it and then cut them a check and just give them the $10,440 to never be seen again. So why don't people run? It's because of oppressive policies like that, not just in Florida, but all over.
No, definitely. And thinking about, grassroots campaigns and, how it compares to the establishment, I think this is also something important to point out. And it ties back into cannabis legalization, because how many incumbents benefit from prohibition in a sense that they're funded by Big Pharma? The incumbent that I ran against receives thousands and thousands of dollars from Big Pharma. Big Pharma is not invested in or interested in the legalization of cannabis on a federal level, because of course they're going to lose power, they're going to lose money, and they're going to lose influence. So I think we need to speak more on, and we do clearly as grassroots progressive candidates,
or they'll push.
But I think it's our responsibility as well to talk with the public, where the Republican Party is not the only party that benefits from voter suppression. The Republican Party is not the only party that benefits from cannabis being prohibited. The Republican Party is not the only party that benefited from the racist war on drugs. The Democratic establishment, moderates, liberals, they have benefited as well, and they are invested in it as well. Hence, we're still in 2020 to where we do not have cannabis legalized at a federal level. So it's a huge pervasive issue, and that's why it's so hard for us to run. That's why we can't often afford to run. That's why we have to fundraise, and we love connecting with people. But it's extremely difficult, and that's by design, because they don't want us to have agency and power within this political system.
They don't want us to be.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I had to step down from a position in order to make this run. I work a shift job in the morning, bright and early at 3 in the morning till 11 in the morning, so I can help to stop the hemorrhaging of my personal finances as I make this run for the people. This is the reality of not being a part of the upper class is when you're trying to run and represent the people and you're not of that ilk, right?
Okay, we have another question coming in from one of our viewers, shifting it back to cannabis for a second. It says, I'm a supporter of local farmers and businesses in this, and they're coming from Oregon, so this is probably more akin to you, Albert. We were promised this when we voted yes, no big cannabis in Oregon. I know of small farmers being driven out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this has kind of happened in every state that has legalized cannabis. There was a conscious effort at the beginning here in Oregon to make it and maintain it as a small mom and pop type of thing, and to take a look at people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. But as soon as it got legalized, we had consortiums from Canada, from Vegas, from places that wasn't even legal, right? And dipping their toes in. Right now, you watch as the variety of different shops have become more consolidated over a course of the last couple of years. The same names have taken over to the same places. They're starting to set up vertical conglomerates where they go from seed to retail, and that's kind of corporate, and that's not really cannabis from what I recall. So I think I think that one of the things that we need to do when we do look at a federal cannabis situation, number one, we need it nationalized for one very important reason, and that's interstate commerce. We aren't allowed to have banks in the cannabis industry.
Yep.
We are not allowed to transfer or sell product across state lines, and that's because it's not legal on a federal level. So it's really important that happens. But number two, the other thing is that because you can't hold bank accounts and whatnot, and you can't get the protection of other businesses, that is another obstacle for small mom and pops from the farm all the way up to the retail section. So we need to make this completely legal so that we can afford those small mom and pops the same kind of protections that other businesses have.
Yeah, and I think another obstacle to all that is also that we have stop and frisk. A lot of people still think that stop and frisk has went away, which is not the case. We still have stop and frisk, and in a greater grand scale of all, it's called the Terry stops. And throughout the country, police throughout the country are still able to stop people for small amounts or even big amounts of marijuana. And when we have that challenge, yeah, just even the suspicion, right? Just based on a suspicion, we're throwing a lot of people into prison. I think off the top of my head, I think over 600,000 people are arrested every year for possession of marijuana. And that's, I think that comes out to like one person every minute or two. So until we get rid of that obstacle, I think that that's another conversation to have, and that really hasn't happened. My opponent, he was the co-chair for Mike Bloomberg's campaign, and Mike Bloomberg, as you know, was the author of Stop and Frisk here in New York City. So when Bloomberg ran for president for the short period of time, it was kind of a slap in the face to communities of color like mine here in New York 5, knowing that our Congress member decided to endorse him, but also became his co-chair. And there's this idea that it's also like a cultural thing too. I think that there's a cultural of like anti-Blackness that really needs to be addressed in our own communities, and it's a classist issue. That just this idea that we need to be hard on punishment, making sure we clean up our streets, and it'll make everything better, which is not the case. When we throw so many poor people into jail, we're not making everything better, because again, those people that are stuck in prison are coming back into society with nothing to work with, nothing to have. And then we now have communities that are being changed demographically. So it plays a huge role. So I think that we really need to address all that.
Here.
Yeah, I mean, it's so pervasive and deep. And from like a firsthand account of a medical cannabis card holder, when we're talking about small mom and pop shops and day shops, small business owners, there's definitely a will. But unfortunately, oftentimes at state and even at the federal level, clearly, we're not supplying the way. So when we legalized January 1st, I saw a shift. So as a medical cannabis card holder, I still go to a dispensary, but now, of course, you have recreational use as well. Something happened January 1st where we literally had a shortage within our state. So we had a shortage of cannabis. So literally we could not go in and say we wanted to purchase 2/8, as many vape pens as we wanted, what I could do before. Now when I go in, I'm limited. So oftentimes, what does that force people to do? One, it's more expensive because you're paying taxes, but now you're going in and you're limited at what you can purchase. Clearly, you're going to have a desire to possibly hold on to your street dealer, the hookup that you have outside of the dispensary. But what was interesting about Illinois, they allocated 8% of funding coming in from legalization to provide and allow our police departments to go after street dealers. And the definition of street dealers also just didn't include somebody on a corner hustling. It also included those small mom and pop individuals that may be making edibles, whatever they're making, treats and edibles and juices and so on and so forth. They have a skill, they're getting out into the market, but they're viewed as illegal still within a legal system. So it's extremely pervasive. And as you stated, it's by design. It's still catching Black and brown individuals up within the system. And then it impacts users as well, whether recreational or medically, that we have such a shortage within our state because we cannot necessarily receive the medicine that we may need to be productive.
Right. Yep. And then on top of that, the government is allowing the local police departments, the discretion to choose where they want to patrol communities. And we know exactly where they're going. So, it's definitely, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, if we had national legalization, we could send you all the surplus that we have here in Oregon.
Hey.
I think we produce like
my mailing address. I got you.
I think we produce 8 times the amount that we can consume here.
And one more thing I want to say, and I think we all know this, let's be honest. The narrative has only recently shifted, particularly within, the higher class because of the opioid epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
When the war on drugs and, the crack epidemic hit, Black and brown people have been impacted by opioids for decades and decades. But now that you're seeing middle class, upper middle class, and wealthy white families, dominating the airways, dominating our news cycle, now the narrative is shifting. Now cannabis is being seen more so and more so as a possible viable medicine to hopefully take individuals off of opioids. And now, maybe we shouldn't look at it, the war on drugs or the issue with, drug addiction as a criminal issue. Maybe we should look at it as a public health issue that should be treated with care.
Bingo.
This is not because they care more about Black and brown, in my estimation. It's because it's impacting more white people.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you talk about heroin. They talked about it in the 60s and 70s as a bunch of junkies, jazz musicians and Negroes, right? And then all of a sudden, when the soccer moms are affected with the opioid crisis, now it's a public health issue. It wasn't a public health issue in the 60s and 70s when it was focused in other communities. But now, now that it's affecting all Americans, or Americans, if they want to call it that way, that's when we get some attention on these issues.
Right. Okay. So I have a question for you guys. How do you, as running as Democrats, how do you operate inside of a system that has dropped the ball for decades when it comes to issues that matter to people of color, that affect people of color?
All right, so that's where we have to have the hard conversation, and we have to recognize that not all kinfolk are kinfolk, and that it is not just the white man doing this to us. And that's been my harshest realization, I think, in my whole race, because in my district, most of our leadership is Black. And no, they are not all bad, but there is so much corruption, not just, in like from the top down to our city commissioners, our mayors, our counties, like our council people. So that's the issue and that's where it really comes to representation, but true representation, and like really shifting the narrative in general, because we can talk about how the system has dropped the ball for POC, but the system is also made up of some people of color who are dropping the ball on us. It's just an overall values issue that really, while yes, we know that, I'm trying to word this in a way that doesn't come off. We just got to know that, yes, both parties, the establishment as a whole has dropped the ball on people of color. But like I said, it's also people of color in leadership positions that are doing this to us. And that's why it comes towards paying attention to candidates, voting on your values, not voting on who you know, where you went to school, who your friends and family are voting for. It's where you actually have to choose representation that's fighting for you. And that's the only way. Getting people in that are literally not taking money from corporations, cannot be bought. You know, we go like cannot be bought, things like that. That is the only way. It's not going to matter. Like, yes, you know, it matters to have a Black agenda, regardless of if you're Black or white. And so really it's getting people in that have that agenda, period. Because specifically, like I said, in my community where I'm coming from, it's our own people doing this to us, leaving us out on the streets. So.
Right. And, you know, electoral politics is not the end all means of all this. This is why it's so important to build dual power, working with grassroots organizers, working with abolitionists to really push the progressive leftist agenda going forward. It's the only way we can keep politicians accountable. When we don't have organizers, when you don't have community activists out there building community, then we're not holding politicians accountable. So for decades, they're able to skate away, and they're able to turn blind eye because no one's paying attention, right? So we need to, you know, continue to build grassroots organizations, build dual power with organizers who are fighting the fight with us. And that's how we keep each other accountable. So that's what we want to see going forward, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I agree with both of you. We need, first of all, to start voting in people that are not there to be a part of the system, but people are there to break it, right? We need to break the system. We need to break the system as it is. And we also need to work from the outside, as Sean has been mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You know, everyone shared such valid points. You know, my grandma always used to say, not all skin folk are kinfolk, and it's so real and it's so relevant today. And for me, I feel like, you know, as a progressive, whatever label you may want to utilize, we have a responsibility not to meet our communities where they are. We have the responsibility to be bold as possible and help guide our communities to where they need to be. Because whether you call them gatekeepers or poverty pimps, there's a lot of individualism cloaked within a collective message. But that's why, as stated earlier, we have to look at policy and we have to help educate our communities. We have to build those wonderful coalitions to educate on policy, because you could quite possibly see a Black face in a leadership position, but that does not mean that that Black face is invested in Black collective empowerment. You could see a woman's face. You could see a transgender. It doesn't matter. You could see any face as an identity. But unless their policy is steeped in and invested in collective growth and empowerment of the people, you know, they're leading you astray. You know, so for me, you know, again, you know, as someone who, you know, again, is a huge fan of Chairman Fred Hampton, you know, it's the ultimate identity is class. You know, no matter what, the ultimate identity for me is class, because this is class warfare, the oppressed versus the oppressors. And once you identify which side you are on, we have to build those intersectional coalitions, come together, bring our individual identities, but build that collective growth and power to take down that top 1%. Because until we do that, we're going to continue to be spinning our wheels and look at somebody that ain't kinfolk benefiting from our oppression.
But that's the thing. You're saying it right there. We're the 99%, but not all of us are realizing this. And we got to figure out a way to bring that realization, that open people's eyes to realize, you know, it's not a stratification of, you know, working class, middle class, upper middle class. It's us versus the very, very top. And that concentration of wealth at the very top, it is just obscene. It's immoral. It is causing so much struggle, pain, and strife for everyone else down the system.
Okay, we have another question that came in from one of our listeners. It says, how do you think we can shift the treatment of criminal justice in the American zeitgeist from a punitive mindset to a restorative mindset?
Yeah, it's funny. I'd like to start with this one. When I was in law school, taking criminal justice, criminal procedure, we had a pretty big name prosecutor, Professor Paul Butler, and I caught him the other day on I think it was on NPR, and he's done a full 180 from being that prosecutor to being a proponent for prison abolition. And when I first heard about prison abolition, I was like, whoa, that sounds just way too radical. But then you start listening and you hear about how things work in other countries, in Scandinavia in particular. And you start to unpack what are the theories of punishment. We call them correctional facilities, but are they correcting? We call them educational. Are they providing education? No. We need to, really take a hard look at abolishing our prison system, abolishing the way that we do this, because really it is just a structure that reinforces oppression of a subset of folks. It reinforces the slavery mentality from the 1800s. We need to break through that because, quite honestly, we've got a place. I grew up in a super segregated St. Louis. Milwaukee's the same way. I believe Chicago is the same way. And all that does is it just reinforces fear and hate of people instead of treating people as the human beings that they are. We need to educate people. We need to start telling them, and asking people to really clearly think about what is the importance and what are we doing with our prison system. We're the country that locks up more people than anybody else in the world, and we're spending so much money on it. Private prisons are profiting on it. I heard about a prison guard in Wisconsin at a private prison who basically said that they're told basically to bait the prisoners so that they can get more time so they can make more profit. That's sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's the thing too, is like when a system is so broken and was literally created, like this entire prison system, the criminal justice system we have today is completely rooted in racism and oppression. Like that's what it was built from. It's really hard to imagine a way to reform it, right? Like we can talk about, okay, our prison system or whatever should be focused on rehabilitation. Great. But how do we go from for-profit prisons? How do we go from the state of Florida being one of the states that locks up the most minors and charges them as adults, literally like a 6-year-old and I believe another like 8-year-old were literally handcuffed and arrested in Orlando recently. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you fix that system from the inside? So I think that's a really long-term, huge question in terms of, well, where do we, because we can't, yes, let's tear things down, let's burn things down, but we can't just burn things down without figuring out how to rebuild and where to go from there after that. You know what I'm saying? So that's where I'm at.
Right. And, 5 to 10 minutes away from where I live, we have a private detention center. So it's being operated by the GEO group, who has been known to, cause harm, human rights violation. They have a long list of it. But however, no one's keeping them accountable because the federal government is contracting with them. So we need to abolish all prisons, and right? We need to abolish all prisons, and not only that, but we need more public defenders running for office. We have Tiffany Caban, who was a leftist public defender running for the district attorney's office here in Queens, and she came up short. And the person that defeated her, she was really claiming onto Tiffany's list of progressive agenda. And now that she won, she has completely forgotten about all that. And look where we are now with coronavirus. We have COVID-19, and it's a population of people who are incarcerated right now that are being forgotten about, and they are getting sick. However, the district attorney, the governor, the mayor, they are not saying anything about it. They do not want to release poor people out of prison because they have a greater fear of poor people of color than they do of this virus.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's deep, as you stated. I mean, shout out, thinking about Cook County right now, 26 in California. It's a hotbed for COVID right now. So many prisoners are being afflicted and coming down and being exposed without any relief. And for me, what I also think about while we discuss, and I am in support of prison abolition, the interconnected issues that lead to already systemic issue, as was stated earlier. So how do we look at how housing and food insecurity leads to, a greater number of individuals incarcerated? How do we look at a lack of infrastructure investment within our communities leads to? How do we look at pollution, which is a social and racial justice issue, leads to a greater prison population? And myself as a teacher, I am here to say as early as pre-K, the school to prison pipeline is real. We are training our students, we are training our Black and brown youth to become commodities, to become prisoners. How we respond to them within our educational system, with detention, suspensions, expulsions. We have police officers in buildings, but we don't have nurses or social workers or therapists for them. So it's a huge issue that exists. And I think other systems that are connected to it are designed to lead individuals to, again, be commodified and enter into the prison industrial complex. So we can't only talk about the abolition of prison, we have to also talk about abolishing the other social issues that we're facing that connects.
And with that, it's so interesting too, because talking about COVID and coronavirus, because my district is a tiny part of Broward County and then mostly Miami. So I try to do work for both. But, both county, like the activist community in both counties is calling for decarceration, of our jails. We've had 2 sheriffs in Broward die of coronavirus. One person being held died, and he was only in the Broward County jail because for a technical violation of probation, couldn't afford bail, got coronavirus, wasn't being treated, didn't get the medical treatment he deserved, and he died. So, in Miami and Broward, we're rallying around and we're like, decarcerate, decarcerate, decarcerate. But at the end of the day, so many of those people don't have anywhere to go when they come out of the jail. And so we already have, the city of Miami has done nothing to even attempt to get the people experiencing homelessness off of our streets. I literally went down to Overtown yesterday with a group, Food Not Bombs, and I was looking for one specific underpass that I know has a large campment of people experiencing homelessness, and I ended up at a completely another one that was a complete tent city. Like, it's insane, and they're not even trying to provide sanitation or anything. We have an entire governmental agency called the Homeless Trust that got millions of dollars in 2016 and has done nothing. So it's such a catch-22 because we're like, yes, please decarcerate the prisons. But then even though we're rallying and we're active, like we're fighting for the people experiencing homelessness, the elected officials in the county are doing nothing. So it's like we're solving one battle only to exacerbate another.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're running out of time. I want to try to give everybody about 30 seconds to try and wrap up. Go ahead and finish.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
Again, it was a pleasure being on, here with, so many wonderful minds, and leaders. For those that are tuning in, listening, that ask questions, again, I try to end every time with challenging individuals. After you listen to this or whenever you're out there, look yourself in the mirror and truly ask yourself, what are you willing to risk and sacrifice for change? Because we have to go beyond simply going to a march over the weekend and having like a poster contest. We have to go beyond posting something on Facebook or Twitter and getting likes. True change, when you're truly invested, it may mean that may cost you a promotion. It may cost you a friendship. It may cost you a family member, but that's real. So if you're going to rock the boat, you better be ready to swim. And I just want to challenge people. We have to go beyond what we're currently doing because it's not enough. But I thank you all. Power to the people. We have to legalize at a federal level. We have to abolish prisons, and we have to continue to fight.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, just adding on to Anthony's point that we cannot be complacent in these issues, because being complacent, we're being silent, and we're going to continue to pour on to these issues that we're talking about. At the end of the day, if we want to really abolish everything that we're trying to fight against, we need people to continue to organize. So, this is a movement going forward, not just for 2020, but for the next generation. This is what it's about at the end of the day. It's about the next up and coming generation. So we need to continue to abolish prisons. We need to legalize marijuana. We need to legalize sex work. And, I'm ready to have this conversation with everyone else that's tuning in.
Okay. Albert?
Yes, no, thank you all. I appreciate being on with all of you. We had some really good discussions. Obviously, we could talk for days about all of these different subjects. For me, I think the thing that we need more than anything else is empathy. I think that all of us here living in this one big, beautiful country really need to try to put ourselves in the perspective and the footsteps of others, and to really ask yourself, and are you treating each other like true human beings? And do you understand it? If you don't understand the struggle, how can you make it so that you do have a better understanding of their perspectives?
All right. All right. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for participating in this.
Housing is a human right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we look forward to hearing from you again. We need to do it real soon because, as you said, we can talk about these issues for days.